You took your first breath on January 17th, 1942, in a small pink-painted house on the west side of Louisville, Kentucky. Louisville was a southern city on the banks of the Ohio River, one that still had racial segregation in its era. Life started for you in the hardest mode possible, buddy. The system drew a line for you the moment you were born, tied to the color of your skin. Restaurants you couldn't enter simply because you were black. Bus seats you couldn't sit in even if empty. And pools you couldn't enter to cool off were waiting for you. Even the name your family gave you was inherited from a slave owner through your great-great-grandfather, Cassius Marcellus Clay Jr. Your father, Cassius Clay Sr., was a painter who supported the family by painting street signs and church walls. A man with dreams who fell victim to the system. Your mother, Odessa Grady Clay, supported your father by cleaning and cooking for neighboring white families. She'd leave early in the morning and come home exhausted in the evening. You grew up alongside your brother Rudolph, playing street games with the neighborhood kids on the same streets. When you were 6, one day you got thirsty and ran toward a fountain to drink water. When you reached out your hand, you saw the words, "For whites," written on the faucet, and sadly, you pulled your hand back. This was the first system boundary etched into your memory, one you'd never forget, and it wouldn't be the last. The year is 1954. You're 12 years old. You went to Columbia Auditorium with the red Schwinn bicycle you got from your father, went inside. When you came out a while later, you saw your bicycle wasn't where you'd left it. Crying with anger, you ran to the police station in the basement of the building and shouted that if you found the thief, you'd beat him black and blue. The police officer in front of you told you, "First, you need to learn how to fight, kid." His name was Joe Martin, both a police officer and an amateur boxing coach. Your bicycle was never found again, but that day, you lost a bicycle and gained a destiny. On October 6, 1954, you had your first official fight in a local amateur boxing program, broadcast on television, and you beat Ronnie O'Keefe on points. Over the next 6 years, you racked up a full 100 wins in the amateur ring, losing only 5 times. That's an incredible level of progress for a young amateur boxer. School life was boring for you, buddy. The letters genuinely fought back against you. In the ring, though, unlike school, you spoke a different language. There, you never stuttered. When you were 14, your coach Fred Stoner taught you to keep rhythm. That boxing wasn't just about throwing punches, but also about dancing. The moment school let out, you'd run to Columbia Gym, return to training again right after dinner, and shadowbox in front of the mirror until midnight. Your coaches called you the most disciplined kid I've ever seen. In 1959, at 17, you stood on the podium at the National Golden Gloves final in Chicago. The kid who came out of Louisville's scorching streets was now, slowly but surely, becoming a name known to the world. At 18, in the summer of 1960, you competed at the Rome Olympics and won gold in the light heavyweight division, beating Poland's Zbigniew Pieczykowski on points in the final. But when you came home, a Louisville restaurant you tried to enter wearing that medal turned you away because of your skin color. With a gold medal in hand, despite a great victory and the world applauding you, your own city still didn't recognize you. You never forgot that contradiction. You signed your first professional contract with the Louisville Sponsoring Group, made up of 10 white Louisville businessmen, and on October 29, 1960, you won your first professional fight against Tunney Hunsaker by a 6-round decision at Freedom Hall. In the locker room, taking off your sweaty gloves, you told your coach, "This is just the beginning." The next 3 years passed like a storm for you. In 1961, you beat Fleeman, Sabadong, Johnson, Mitteff, and Bezmanoff. In 1962, you beat Sonny Banks, the man who knocked you down for the first time, Daniels, and Archie Moore, knocking Moore out in the 4th round, reaching an 18-fight unbeaten streak. In 1963, you beat British champion Henry Cooper, who himself knocked you down once, by referee stoppage due to a cut, and beat Doug Jones by a close decision, rising to title contention. Before every fight, you'd shout to the cameras which round you'd knock your opponent down in, and more often than not, you were right. On February 25, 1964 in Miami Beach, in a fight nobody believed you could win, you faced world champion Sonny Liston. You were shouting, "I am the greatest," at press conferences, and nobody believed it. You applied your float like a butterfly, sting like a bee philosophy, and at the end of the 6th round, Liston refused to come out of his corner. The arena froze. You, at 22, were world champion, one of the youngest champions up to that point. The next day, in front of the press, you dropped the bombshell. "I am no longer Cassius Clay, I am Muhammad Ali." You announced that you had become Muslim and converted to Islam, but a loss awaited you in the shadow of your victory. Malcolm X, the man who had guided you onto this path, left the Nation of Islam that same year. As you stayed on Elijah Muhammad's side, he left it all behind. The last time you crossed paths on the streets of Cairo, you didn't even greet him. A year later, in February 1965, Malcolm was assassinated and lost his life. To this day, you carried guilt every night for not having greeted him that day. On May 25, 1965, in the rematch with Liston, you knocked him out in the first round with a right cross that went down in history as the Phantom Punch. Because a title fight ending that fast was so rarely seen in boxing history, the controversy lasted for years. Over the next 3 years, you defended your title 9 times. You fought to the end against powerful opponents one after another. Patterson, Chuvalo, the Cooper rematch, London, Mildenberger, Williams, and Terrell. Your performance against Cleveland Williams on February 14, 1966, over 3 rounds, the punch speed and combination variety you displayed that night, became a night boxing historians still, years later, describe as a level of mobility no heavyweight boxer had ever displayed. Ernie Terrell kept insisting on calling you by your old name, Clay, and you delivered an incredible performance shouting, "What's my name? Say my name," with every punch for 15 rounds, attacking with everything you had. Then, when the calendar reached 1967, the government called you up for the draft, and you refused that call, saying, "No, I ain't got no quarrel with them Viet Cong." Because of that one sentence you spoke, you lived through the worst period of your career. The belt you'd won fighting through blood and sweat was stripped from you, and your license was revoked in every state. Overnight, you went from being one of the richest athletes in the world to a man who couldn't earn a single cent. You couldn't step into any ring for 3.5 years. Yet boxing was your only source of income, and once your license was revoked, you had almost no earnings left. You tried to make a living through the lectures you gave at universities and a short-lived Broadway role. When you looked at the letters arriving in your mailbox, you found hate-filled writings declaring you a traitor to your country. Some newspapers still wrote your name as Clay. During this period, the tension between you and your first wife, Belinda, kept growing. You had no money and your financial situation was bad. In 1971, the Supreme Court ruled unanimously in your favor in the case Clay versus United States, and you returned to where you belonged, the ring. On March 8, 1971, you faced Joe Frazier in the fight of the century. For 15 rounds, you two literally fought each other without giving an inch. In the final round, Frazier's left hook sent you to the canvas. You got up, finished the fight, but lost, for the first time in your professional career. On the way to that fight, you had called Frazier ignorant, and those words wounded Frazier so deeply that even decades later, he never forgave you for it. This had stopped being an ordinary sporting rivalry and become a personal matter. After the fall you experienced, you climbed back up again by eliminating your rivals. Ellis, Foster, Chuvalo, Quarry. Rematches with Patterson, 10 wins in a row. Against Norton, your jaw was broken in the first fight, and you lost. 6 months later, in the first rematch, you got your revenge. In 1974, you beat Frazier in a rematch, and the road you were on took you all the way to Africa. On October 30th, 1974, in Kinshasa, you came face-to-face with George Foreman, who had the hardest punches in the world. On the streets, the people were shouting, "Ali, kill him!" That slogan became the symbol of the fight. You did something unexpected. You leaned against the ropes, covered your face with your arms, and let Foreman hit you. Your corner kept shouting, "Get up, move, fight," at you. But your plan was something entirely different. Because of your plan, Foreman grew more and more exhausted round after round, and in the 8th round, that moment arrived. Knockout. The belt was yours again 7 years later. A year later, on October 1st, 1975, in Manila, on a night when the heat was scorching everything, you faced Frazier for a third and final time. For 14 rounds, you two tore each other apart, not like rivals, but like enemies. Frazier's corner stopped the fight, and you were still standing, but utterly exhausted. Afterward, you described that night as the closest thing to death. You held onto the belt for a few more years. The storm in the ring was nothing next to the storms at home. Your first marriage, to Sanji, wore you both down thoroughly. She refused to submit to the clothing requirements of the Islamic faith, and you parted ways without children. Afterward, you met your second wife, Belinda, and had 4 children with her: Miriam, Jamila, Rashida, Muhammad Ali Jr., but infidelity allegations and endless travel caused your marriage to end in 1977. The custody battle and division of assets, playing out in front of the public eye, became a process that wore you down too. That same year you married Veronica. Layla and Hannah were born from that marriage. In 1978, Leon Spinks took the belt from you. You were 36 but refused to give up, and that same year, in the rematch, you took back the belt that belonged to you. You're the first man in history to become world champion 3 times, but that was the last great night. In 1980, you faced your former student Larry Holmes. Your coach Angelo Dundee couldn't watch anymore in the 10th round and stopped the fight. The crowd was silent. Your agility wasn't what it used to be. On December 11th, 1981, you fought your last fight against Trevor Berbick, and you closed out your career with 56 wins, 37 by knockout, and 5 losses. In 1984, at 42, you were diagnosed with a disease doctors called Parkinson's syndrome. The price of the thousands of punches you'd taken over the years was coming due now. You were having trouble speaking, and your hands trembled. Most of the millions you'd earned at the peak of your career went up in smoke because of poor management and bad advice. Once the richest and fastest athlete in the world, hardly a trace of your old self remained. This was a kind of defeat no opponent had ever managed to hand you. A silent, slow, irreversible defeat. In 1986, you married Lonnie, your last and most solid marriage. In 1990, you went to Iraq and met with Saddam Hussein, mediating for the release of Americans held hostage before the Gulf War. In 1996, in Atlanta, with trembling hands, you lit the Olympic torch. You were no longer just a former champion. You were a symbol of peace in the eyes of the world. In 2005, you opened a center bearing your name in Louisville, and President George W. Bush presented you with the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the nation's highest civilian honor. Ring Magazine, Sports Illustrated, BBC, all of them declared you Athlete of the Century. On June 3, 2016, in Scottsdale, Arizona, at 74 years old, your breathing stopped and you closed your eyes on this life, taking your last breath. You left behind a career of 56 wins, a world championship won 3 times, and an Olympic gold medal, but far more than that too, buddy. History will remember you not for a technique that was never beaten inside the ring, but for a courage that could say no to the boundaries the system imposed outside of it. You floated like a butterfly, you stung like a bee, but you threw your hardest punch for justice. Well folks, we've reached the end of another one of our videos. Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts and opinions in the comments, and subscribe to the channel. See you in the next video. Until then, take care of yourselves, with love and respect.